Love Beyond Belief, a sermon by the Reverend Kate Lohr. I start this morning with a story about Rabbi Abraham Heschel. It's 1965. The rabbi has just participated in the historic Civil Rights March from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Picture Rabbi Heschel at the Montgomery airport trying to find something to eat before his flight leaves for New York City. A surly woman behind the counter is glaring at him. His yarmulke, his white beard, making him look very out of place in Protestant Alabama. She mockingly proclaims, "Well, I'll be darned." Actually, she uses another word. "My mother always told me there was a Santa Claus, and I didn't believe her until now." She then brusquely tells the rabbi there is no food to be had at the airport. Now, the rabbi thinks, it's certainly possible that there's no food left at the airport. Many civil rights marchers have come through the airport, all of them presumably hungry. On the other hand, it is more likely that this woman suspects that I've been in Montgomery for the march and simply doesn't want to serve food to any strange-looking northerner stirring up trouble in her town. So the rabbi thinks. So what would you do if you were the rabbi in this situation? Picture yourself in Heschel's shoes, at that snack counter feeling tired and hungry, emotionally stressed from all the confrontations you've just gone through, not just with the police, but with jeering crowds on the sidelines. What would you do? Would you accuse this waitress of being an anti-Semite? Would you dig in your heels and demand proof that there was no more food? Would you simply shoot her a glare before walking away in resignation? It's hard to know what you do in the moment, isn't it? But then again, most of us haven't undergone the nonviolence training of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. either, which Heschel just had. Thus, Heschel fully understands the significance of this exchange at the snack counter. He understands that this is a moment requiring nonviolence and love. This is an opportunity in which he and the waitress, two human beings terribly out of sync with one another, might find some small piece of common ground and be transformed by it. Thus, the rabbi knows he can't simply react to the woman. He must sort through all of his possible responses until he can find one that just might build a bridge to this woman. He searches for that place where a loving, non-violent relationship can be found, because this is where the sacred lives, because this is where spirit breathes and opens up new possibilities. One of its names is creative interchange. Another name for it is love. So what does Rabbi Heschel do? Even though he is exhausted and hungry and has just been mocked, the rabbi has been trained for interactions just like this. So first he responds to the woman with a smile. Then he pauses and he gently asks her, "Is it possible that in the kitchen there might be some water?" "Yes." "Is it possible that in the refrigerator you might find a couple of eggs?" "Perhaps." "Well then, if you boiled the eggs in water, that would be fine." "And why should I?" "Why should you? Well, after all, I did you a favor." "What favor did you ever do for me?" "I proved that there is a Santa Claus." As the story goes, the waitress laughs and soon brings him some food. It's a true story, and it's one that's shared today because it clearly demonstrates what can happen when we approach our activism as a practice of love. Not only is it more effective, it's actually good for us, good for our perceived opponents, good for our world. Love is, after all, the only doctrine to which we subscribe. Here we are, an association of congregations, the one in Portland, the one here, free of any creed or doctrine, yet we make an exception, it seems, when it comes to love. In the Portland congregation, we say each week, love is the doctrine of this church, the quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. These covenantal words are precious to our people. They are part of our UU identity. And here in Des Moines, you say in unison each week, your commitment to be open to life, expecting to love, prepared to serve. Even though our individual experiences with love vary greatly, there is something about the concept of love that we deeply trust, that we think is worth expecting and bringing about in our world the very best that we can. Our songs, our readings, our meditations, and prayers poetically often describe a wondrous love that can sustain, comfort, and guide us, that can help us build bridges and even new lands. But what is the nature of this love? What would our world look like if we actually let this kind of love guide us? In 1 Corinthians, love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful. It's not arrogant or rude. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. This description of love, it's often used in our celebrations of marriage. It describes the compassionate aspects of love, right? This is the love that nurtures kindness, that acknowledges suffering, assures us that we will ultimately be well because the sacred dwells within all people. It's important to note, however, that this is just one aspect of love, one that flourishes in trusting relationships built upon mutually good intentions, which don't always exist. You see, it's not the aspect of love one draws upon when confronting evil. One need only take a quick review of human history to understand that our capacity for goodness is matched equally by our capacity for evil, especially when there is power to be gained or profit to be made. Such times require tapping into a larger love, we might say, one that can incorporate the whole of humanity. This greater love does not guide us to be patient in the face of injustice or to endure any sort of systemic oppression. Rather, this greater love calls us together to challenge the status quo, to liberate the oppressed, to break the chains that bind us all, and to do it without succumbing to hate. In the words of Dr. King, this love is creative. It is the refusal to defeat any individual. When you rise to this level of love, when you rise to its great beauty and power, you seek only to defeat evil systems. Individuals who happen to be caught up in those systems you love, but you seek to defeat the systems. As you might imagine, this level of love is neither easy to practice nor easy to sustain. People who have not taken the time to understand themselves nor their own roles and the problems of the world cannot fully embody its dynamic power. Loving our enemies, seeing our tears in the tears of others, respecting and embracing otherness does not come naturally to us. It's extremely challenging, morally, spiritually, intellectually. It requires discipline, humility, and practice. Here's an example from the kind of work I do with the congregation I serve in Portland. Picture yourself back in 2002, when our country was beginning to think about invading Iraq. President Bush was in office. Intelligence stories were emerging about Saddam Hussein purchasing the ingredients and equipment to make weapons of mass destruction, yellow cake, aluminum tubes. Those were difficult days in the congregation I served. We couldn't tell if these reports had merits. We couldn't assess the likelihood that Hussein would use nuclear weapons against Israel. We didn't have a lot of faith in President Bush as a whole, and we feared that our young men would get drafted. And then it happened. On March 23rd, 2003, our country invaded Iraq, and our congregation erupted in emotional distress. Some of us were furious. We began marching on the streets of Portland. Some of us were in such deep despair that all we could do was hug each other and weep. Some of us were veterans from prior wars, and all sorts of traumatic memories were surfacing. It was a very difficult time. As the social justice minister, it was my job to discern what love was calling us to do. My prayer life deepened. I spent more time in nature. I did everything I could to open up the doors to the Spirit as I perceive it and to listen. And then I got to work. I organized an all-church dialogue that was structured to reveal our common concerns, whether we were for the war or against it. These common concerns shared in community brought us back together. I began teaching classes on spiritual practices. This helped our folks cope with their anger and their fear. I organized letter writing campaigns and meetings with our legislators. This helped us feel our power. I organized interfaith peace services. This helped us feel united with others. And then the most beautiful idea surfaced, not from me, but from members of our Peace Action Committee. We began keeping track of every Oregonian soldier killed in the war, and then reached out to their families. After offering our condolences, we asked the parents to tell us about their son or daughter and to lend us a photo. We then took those stories and those photos to all the artists in our congregation, and we asked them to create a portrait that would honor the life of each fallen soldier. From there, we pulled together a public art show and invited the public. The press ate it up. And then, at the conclusion of the exhibit, we gave each portrait to the parents of the fallen soldiers. As you might imagine, we were all transformed by these experiences. We were united, we were spiritually grounded, we were creative, and we allowed our hearts to be cracked wide open by connecting with the families of fallen soldiers. So from the ugliness of war, we found a way to beauty. Can you see how this love-based social action is extremely sacred work, and that it requires more time and energy than any senior minister can muster alone? Kate says, I really wish I could be delivering this sermon in person. Not only would I love to be meeting each of you, I think I could learn a thing or two about dealing with snow. As it is, I am several hundred miles away, having my very first experience of being snowed in. If I were delivering this sermon in person, though, this is the part where I would look each of you in the eyes and commend you for hiring a social justice minister. I would affirm that your timing couldn't be better, that we are sitting squarely in the middle of an emerging evolution of consciousness, one that is calling us together to bring forth our greatest spiritual and ethical maturity. This is the time when we must be fully conscious, when we must be willing to assume responsibility for what we do in ways never before asked of us. If we do not meet the challenge, if we shrink away, if we hide in our supposed insignificance, if we allow our frequent numbness to the world's difficulties to rock us into moral oblivion, our future looks dim. But if we do accept the call to change, to open ourselves to the fullness of these difficulties, and thereby to the strengths that lie within, if we do surrender to the love that will not ever let us go, then the creative possibilities before us are endless. Because the solidarity with humankind and the earth is far greater than human beings have ever before known or can imagine. And so, my friends in Des Moines, I wish you well in bringing forth an additional spiritual leader, one who will help you find ways to lengthen and strengthen the moral arc of the universe with your hearts open and your hopes high. In so doing, may you discover a new level of courage and creativity to non-violently erase all the isms and schisms that divide us. And may you remember once again who we really are. Brothers and sisters, one human family born of one source, connected to one source, returning to one source, whose name is and always shall be love. May it be so. Amen.